puentes para enlazar el pensar, el decir, el sentir y el actuar en beneficio de la humanidad.
Ya, muy bien, de acuerdo. Chao, chao.
La Gran Logia de Chile es una institución laica, integrada por personas de espíritu libre. Su estructura fundamental se basa en un sistema educativo, tradicional y simbólico, realizado a través de un proceso de perfeccionamiento personal. Exalta la virtud y dignidad del ser humano, promoviendo la solidaridad y la justicia social, y establece puentes para enlazar el pensar, el decir, el sentir y el actuar en beneficio de la humanidad. La Gran Logia de Chile es una institución laica, integrada por personas de espíritu libre. Su estructura fundamental se basa en un sistema educativo, tradicional y simbólico, realizado a través de un proceso de perfeccionamiento personal. Exalta la virtud y dignidad del ser humano, promoviendo la solidaridad y la justicia social, y establece puentes para enlazar el pensar, el decir, el sentir y el actuar en beneficio de la humanidad.
Bienvenidas y bienvenidos a todas y a todos. Estamos dando...
Welcome everyone. We are beginning the second day of the Climate Week 2020 organized by the Grand Lodge of Chile, commemorating the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, seeing the ethical issues with climate change from the view of masonry and generating a space for discussion on these issues and the importance of national climate action. Every day of the week has a different perspective, and today is ethical challenges, global challenges of climate change focused on energy. So today we will reflect upon climate change regarding energy. My name is David Gonzalez Cabezas. I'm from the Biobío region, member of the Sustainability and the Climate Change Commission of the Grand Lodge of Chile, and I'll be part of the panel that we have prepared for you today. And I want to leave to you the Grand Secretary, Dr. Rodrigo Salinas, who will greet us from the Grand Lodge of Chile, welcoming us to the second day of the Climate Week 2020. Good morning, friends. In name of the Grand Lodge of Chile and of your Grand Master Sebastián Jans Perez, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this second day of activities for the Climate Week 2020 organized by the Sustainability and Climate Change Commission of the Grand Lodge of Chile. Today, we will have distinguished speakers with a large trajectory and knowledge on the topic, and they will be timely welcome. And this talk is called Ethical Global Challenges of Climate Change Focused on Energy. With this title, we want to highlight the essential component of the discussion on this very relevant matter, because the decisions around it that we take as individuals and governments take for us are depending on the future of mankind and its sustainability in time and the way we know life today. So it's time maybe to remember the origin of the expression bioethics that today is related to medicine, sciences, health sciences, but being being invented by Fritz Jans, the German educator, a few years ago. He wanted to emphasize the essentially ethic character of mankind's relationship with the rest of living beings. So the ethical character of this relationship was extended by whom is usually considered the father of this discipline, Van Densen Potter, the American ecologist, for whom bioethic was the ethic of survival that had to integrate biology, ecology, and health sciences, and philosophical reflection on what is the right path that mankind has to take in order to ensure its continuity in time, particularly facing the progress of technology. In 2020, it marks 50 years of publication of his article Bioethics, the Science of Survival. And it's a privileged time in order to reflect on the current situation we're facing and the new challenges that technology and techniques that we see today with the correct use of technology of energy it's exposing these challenges to mankind. You're all invited to assist to this very interesting panel with the guests that will discuss this matter with us today. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge of Chile, Dr. Rodrigo Salinas Rio. Well, without a doubt, this reflection on the discipline of environmental ethic on the instrumental value of energy is fundamental, and the balance between human development and the limits of nature is key when we want to put in work urgent and deep climate action that allow us to reorient the path of mankind for a sustainable development, and we need to improve the daily reflections for people and institutions, and we need to know how our daily actions determine the consumption of resources and the consumption of global energy and the impact on greenhouse gases and determining the depth of the climate impact worldwide. We need to push responsible changes and implement climate policies, implement solutions for energy efficiency, renewable energies, and all these actions are paths that join the unique road that implies demanding this main challenge of the Paris Agreement, which is the contention of the temperature increase in 1.5 degrees Celsius. So today we will address the ethical challenges of this climate change with very renowned speakers that work today to give content to this climate action. So today we will review four perspectives based on environmental ethics and that have concrete projects in matters of climate crisis. We'll go over an ethics with the nature and the international funding for decarbonization of economy, the private role of renewable energy and unconventional energy projects in sustainability, and the vision of a state company to reduce worldwide emissions. So when we finish today, we hope to increase our knowledge on the different looks and acknowledge certain efforts that different organizations, international organizations, are taking in order to address the Paris Agreement challenge. And this organized experience can motivate us as citizens of the world to join our efforts and look for the climate action. Now we will move on to the presentations of our four guests, and I invite you to ask your questions regarding these presentations using the Zoom chat. This is the bar, and you can ask your questions here. I'm the moderator, David Gonzalez. You can write to me. You can ask the questions I will ask to the speakers at the end of today. So first of all, I want to introduce our first guest, Marcelo Mena. Marcelo Mena is an academic from the Pontifical Catholic University of Valparaiso of the Center of Climate Action of the same universities, biochemical engineer with a master in environmental engineering, and he was manager of research for climate change for the World Wide Bank, and he's an expert in environmental atmospheric contamination and climate change, as he's worked with National Geographic for the Clean Air Collection. Dear Marcelo, thank you for joining us today. You can begin your presentation, Global Challenges of Climate Change in the Anthropocene Era. Thank you for the opportunity of presenting this today, 5 years after the Paris Agreement. I hope I can share my screen here and I'll begin. It's really been great times. We lived that day on December 12th. And we changed this trend we had with not really reaching agreements regarding these topics and being able to reach global agreements with determined determine agreements with the international circumstances that are very important. And some people thought that this agreement was very flexible, but in its virtue is precisely in this: it's capable of generating the opportunity for each country to commit, and most countries are committed with this, especially after the United States left. And we couldn't really use a treaty like Kyoto, which was quite strict, but only consigned 10% of global emissions. I will reflect on what has meant this agreement has meant in recent times and what we have ahead of us. So this agreement, as many know, has the purpose of limiting global warming below 1.5 degrees, and 1.5 degrees is not really a random number. I want to share with you this gift that was given to me by girl from the Marshall Islands in 2015 when we entered the meeting with the subsecretaries for the final negotiation. She gave us these because it was made with palm trees from the Marshall Islands, and she told me and she told all the ministers, the subsecretaries, that if we were not capable of reaching an agreement for 1.5 degrees, her island would disappear. And this 1.5 degrees for a place like Chile also reflects the existence of the glaciers that today provide very important water sources. So 2 years ago, and this is a graph from 2 years ago, the commitment of countries, as indicated here in the Paris Agreement, were insufficient because if all would agree and would fulfill, it would be on 3 degrees, which was well above this 1.5 um, goal. So 2020 has not been a lost year because with the commitments of China, the European Community, and beginning with the commitment, Chile's commitment in April 2020, everything adds up and makes us closer to 2.1 protected degrees, which puts us in um, puts us on sides of the Paris Agreement. And when the United States comes back to the Paris Agreement with the decarbonization goal, we're talking about 1.5 degrees not being an illusion, but a possible reality. And it's also important to note that mitigating climate change is much cheaper than facing the damages it will cost. Climate change may cause a loss of about 10% towards the end of the century. And in GDP, we're talking about the vulnerable economies that will lose so greatly up towards 2050. But generating this climate change would mean having more benefits, generating more incomes in order to support social expenses and creating a more inclusive space. So, along with the Global Commission launched a report that says that mitigation is not only profitable, but adaptation to climate change is also profitable. So we invert an early alert system, and we would anticipate damage, invest in resilient structure, spending just an additional 20%, and ensuring we're better prepared for climate change with 5 times more cost benefits and a series of other measures. But in this context, we're also committed to mitigating and in the April national meeting to have a peak as science requires and reduce half the emissions by 2030 as science requires. And we commit carbon neutrality by 2050, which doesn't mean that Chile is going to be zero emission, but a net manner that the sources will balance towards half the century to a half a reduction. And this race to zero we have, it's a race that it's getting more adept each time. There are more and more countries joining this commitment, and Chile also marked the tone as the president of the COP by signing this commitment, because many countries weren't really committed beyond this, understanding all the pandemic geopolitical situation that's been given lately. Why is Chile doing it? Because complying with this commitment would allow to give more investments and decrease operational costs. And that is a great opportunity we have in order to make our economy more efficient. The World Bank studied the goals of decarbonization and indicated that would be about the 4% of additional growth possible due to complying with this decarbonization goal. So, leaving this false dilemma behind and then privileging, so this manifests with many. I want to give you many updated data so you can ratify. And in places such as Chile, building new energy for the new demand, and then the cheapest new source is renewable. Solar, wind, these are the new sources that are more efficient and are more profitable than coal, diesel, natural gas, nuclear, even. So, a good trend today is that all new demands are cheaper to supply them with renewable energy. So, the capacity of installing this and making investment projects in Chile and the world are renewable, non conventional. So, operating an existing central, sometimes is more expensive than building a new wind or solar central. And that means that in Chile there is an agreement for closing thermoelectric centrals. And in 2018, we continue with this because it could be more profitable to build a new central and continue to operate with the expensive resources for the operators and for the environment as well. So this is a good news. And the third important trend is that in recent times we have realized that solar energy and storage of solar energy can be competitive compared to other sources, and that has caused a certain revolution. So my prediction so far is that these being cheaper makes that the transmission it can be easier to make a transmission because in Chile there is not much can be supplied by storage. So how do we achieve this with solar systems, batteries, and they can inject solar energy during the day, and at night they can also inject because they were able to store. and that's why here we have a new parameter with here we have these solar panels with a 100,000 mega storage, and this can operate about 30 mega for 4 hours or 10 megas for 12 hours, and this is cheaper than what we are paying for. And this has an impact on electromobility. And Chile has the largest amount of electric buses outside of China. This step of having these emissions, this many rules for emission, allows us to take this step to an electric Transantiago. And this is a measure that is more profitable than a diesel bus that causes net savings and the rest of the emissions being proposed, such as mining trucks and a series of other measures. And this is really going to help us achieve the decarbonization goal in Chile. And it's going to increase our capacity for electric energy. It's going to increase the contribution to heating, mining, transportation. It's going to be electric. As we can see here, we have the recent trend in the Santiago network. We have these buses, these recent buses. It's about a tenth of the Transantiago are electric buses already. And this is a very basic analysis regarding why this happens when we have 75% less operation costs. And when we operate with 18 cents to dollar per kilometer versus 69 cents per kilometer, we're talking about in 80,000 kilometers a year. This really pays the raising cost in the 3 4 years. So it's just uh, completely doable within a Transantiago contract. This was anticipated a few years ago in a study that showed that today it was cheaper to have an electric bus than having a diesel bus in terms of operation. And so this is the story for Chile, and it has to do with something else as well. The larger the demand of supplies for clean technologies is going to mean lithium and copper buses is going to be sustainable. And there's a series of other materials that will be available in other countries, such as cobalt, for example. It's a strategic mineral that has a large amount of ore in El Congo, and has a series, just a series of problems, political problems, on how to extract this mineral. Sometimes with employees. With children employees and large amount of these of Chinese property. So there's a geopolitical issue with cobalt going on, but in internal terms, the larger demand for copper extraction and 7% annual is going to bring doubling in the absolute demand by 2050, and this copper is going to be have to be green. And what does this have to do with carbonization? Has to do that we have a solar potential that is well over our capacity to of using it. We have about 70 times more electric energy potentially available from the sun that we have exploited, and the transformation, the regional integration is fundamental for a larger leveraging. And here's what we have: the green hydrogen strategy, which is the new strategy that was launched a month ago, where Chile is projecting sales and production about $33,000, $1,000 of green hydrogen, and with a large amount of installation potential to uh, to produce an investment of $130,000 million. So this is not just an environmental worry, but this is something that can change the productive identity of a country, replace the technology, and exporting and feeling well in order to use this fuel for heavy engines required for the extraction. So with a with a sturdy economy, I want to say that one of the big things that we have with the Paris Agreement is that today it's in the financial system. So today we have 54 countries that are committed to regulate calculating and transparenting the climate risks in the financial sector, companies, financial aspects, and the people in companies such as BlackRock are very deep because in practice they're administrating pension funds, they're administrating funds such as in Chile, and they can exert a unique pressure to um, just to interested parties, and they did this with the electric companies, and they allowed to close the thermoelectrical centrals, which is something that's happening in Chile, and they're going strong and saying either you start doing this, or we will just you're just going to change all the managers. So the pressure of the financial system towards the compliance of the Paris Agreement, the fact of just having to acknowledge their own responsibility and transparency the risks, I think is something that might change global funding, climate funding very well. So a couple of weeks ago in Chile, we announced that from 2021, all companies that minister pensions have to declare their climate assets or assets that are incompatible with the safe future that we are looking after. So it's not about growth or employment. The path of decarbonization is the path that will allow us to fight poverty, create employment, bring more benefits, and of course, bring a cleaner air. So in this decade, this is decisive, and we need to comply with the Paris Agreement. We need to fulfill it. We cannot gamble the resources of our children. So the question is, which path will we take? I hope we take the green pill, and we can really choose sustainable development for Chile. Thank you very much. We know you won't be able to stay with us all day, but we thank you for your availability, for all the knowledge that you provided to us. So thank you very much. I would like to remind you that towards the end today, we will have a room for questions. So we will enable the chat. Not, right now, the chat's not enabled, but we will enable it in that opportunity, and the different guests may respond. So that's why it's not enabled right now, but we will do so towards the end. I want to move on to our second guest. It's Janina Franco. Janina is a senior specialist in energy of the World Bank, and she has worked in Latin American regions, Caribbean, Europe, Central Asia. Before joining the World Bank, she worked in the Harris Institute as a social researcher for the initiative Millennium City, and has a master's in urban planification, an architect of the University of Chile, has post degrees in public and private associations in the energy sector. So, Janina, thank you for joining us. You can begin your presentation called Energy as the Center of the Global Path for Sustainable Development, and of course, with the corporate video will present for your institution.
¿Ahora sí me escuchan?
Can you hear me now? Thank you very much for inviting me to this event of the Climate Week of the Red Lodge of Chile. I think it's very interesting and I appreciate the invitation. I want to congratulate Marcelo for his presentation. It was quite important. It had a lot of information why we should be interested on this and why climate change is so important and how energy is going to have a part in this. I will share my screen now. Apparently, I cannot share it.
Sí, ¿se ve la presentación?
Yes, all right. So can you see the presentation? Yes, we can see it. All right. I hope you can see it well. All right, so basically, as the video showed briefly, the World Bank is an association comprised of different organizations, and then we work with two organizations, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Funding, and the International Association of Funding for to support governments in the sustainable investments, funding, knowledge, and collective action. It's also a branch that works with the private sector, the international corporation. It's the entity that shows one to private sector, and it's an international center for investments working with the private sector. All right. The mission of the World Bank puts an end to extreme poverty and promotes prosperity by sharing this. That means that the 40%, the lower 40%, has access to all the benefits economical, social, health, education, agriculture, sustainable development, transportation, energy, and this is a quite important topic that the bank has been doing since the end of the 90s, and it's the impact of climate change. And this fundamentally because we know that this is affecting increasingly the population, but especially the most vulnerable part of the population. So as the video showed, we have made more and more investments in clean energies, in investments that address not only mitigation but the adaptation as well. And this because, as we mentioned in the previous presentation, if we follow the path we're on, infrastructure, the existing infrastructure in the economy on a global level is going to take us to an increasing temperature of 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is going to be catastrophic, and we're going to see more natural disasters, more people affected by these natural disasters due to climate matters. And we need to think on how we're going to move forward, how we are going to prevent getting stuck on infrastructure that won't allow us to reduce these emissions. So what we see now, all of this is data from the International Energy Agency, and the pandemic has been a shock in the energy system on a global level. Many countries in the region have reduced their demand in 20, about 20%, and there are industries that won't come back, and this will take a while to recover. So, if in a positive context, if we control the pandemic on 2021, we expect the energy demand to go back to the pre-COVID levels on 2023. And if this takes even longer, we would say that this demand could reach pre-COVID levels on 2025, which in terms of emission is the first will be the first drop we've had, the substantial drop in energy demand, and it may have an important impact for emissions. But when we see this in a broader context, in time, in the long term, we see that this decrease, this significant decrease today, is not enough to change the trend that we have been seeing with the trajectory for emissions that we've been seeing. And here there's a projection that the International Energy Agency made on what it means, what this commitment mean for neutrality for the European Union. We reduce, here you see the blue line reduce. What does it mean with the Chinese commitments of neutrality, carbon neutrality? And we see that the way we can address emissions and reduce them is if we ensure that all countries commit to decarbonization. So to reach this trajectory, we've established certain routes, and we see that on a global level, we need to orient our thinking and our future investments. And there's a proposal conducted by IRENA, the International Agency of Renewable Energy, and with three scenarios, not very ambitious, in reaching 2 degrees Celsius, and a more ambitious goal with the Paris Agreement of 1.5 degrees Celsius, and seeing what we would need and how we could develop our energy matrix and industrial matrix in order to reduce these emissions. And the three scenarios are pointing to investing in renewable energies and energy efficiency, because this would be step number one. And then have more electromobility, and to reach the industrial sector, which is the hardest. We are seeing green fuels. We're seeing green hydrogen here. This is becoming stronger, and it's going to be important if we want to reach that ambitious goal. So, why is this important? Because I believe that there's been a lot of progress in electromobility. We reach scales that is going to decrease prices, and we're seeing competitive energies. And there are sectors that are more difficult, and the industrial sector, we're seeing that on a global level, or we're seeing 20% of emissions. And in the more difficult sectors, such as transportation, um, sea transportation, aviation, this is about 8% of global emissions. So addressing these sectors is going to be fundamental to reach neutral carbon economies. This is a change in the way we think, we visualize strategies, and we're not talking about reducing emissions, but of reaching this carbon neutrality. And what does this imply? This implies that we need to work intersectoral and having more convergence in different sectors. And we're seeing that in the pandemic, we have this dent, this decreasing dent, and we have an opportunity of thinking how we can rebuild for more resilience. So these could seem what other changes we can have for this technological revolution in energy that we're seeing, and renewable energies with batteries, electromobility, with the solar roofs, all the infrastructure for chargers, and everything related to it, and how that's going to address the different pillars that we're seeing are going to be important for decarbonization, for energy, residential, transportation, electromobility, and but the hardest sector to arrive is going to be industrial. That's why green hydrogen and renewable energies are going to be fundamental. But to achieve these, we see that Chile has been moving forward in fundamental matters, and we've been able to um, to make renewable energies more massive, which is something that's really good for different countries in the region. And but for electromobility, we're doing the same thing. It's a technology that starts developing. start expanding, we decrease the cost and it becomes cost effective. So the question is how we manage to do that for these industrial sectors that are harder to reach. And we're seeing that these will have this can be done using the strategy that we've been using to develop renewable energies and energy efficiency, which is first of all to make pilots and then show that technology is working, and
beneficios, tanto financieros como sociales, como económicos, ¿no? Y que vayan generando la confianza. Y esta confianza va a hacer que se vayan...
And to generate confidence. And this confidence will make us generate a greater business model to generate some concessions at a greater scale in general terms. But this also goes by hand with public policies that may generate this demand. So what we're seeing right now, this decade, for example, 2020, is to consolidate the different changes in electromobility. We've made a lot of progress in that area. But at the same time, we're preparing the path for decarbonization in other sectors. So what Marcela was mentioning, 4.4% of GDP that can be somehow increased with adaptation projects. And what we're trying to say right here is that investing in mitigation and adaptation system is actually expensive, but you're actually investing, but the benefits in the middle term are higher and they will produce higher growth. So in this sense, we need to think on how to make more smart investment. And at the same time, this investment must be compatible with carbon neutrality, because the higher risk that we have is taking decisions today that may have the country caught with unused assets. And I believe that this path that the country is taken on taking out the thermoelectrical generators, it's an important decision, because now we're seeing that this won't be cost effective. So that way we won't have these white elephants. So we need to think about the industry, the mining industry. We need to think about the industry in general, the global steel industry, for example, cement industry, and even the construction industry, how we are making things greener. But how can we take these decisions to reach carbon neutrality? And with this being said, I want to conclude my presentation. Thank you so much. Dear Janina, thank you so much for your presentation. I'd like to mention that from Washington, your presentation was seen amazingly and your slides were great. So it was the perfect combo. And thank you so much for your knowledge, for the path you are sharing with us, and for what the World Bank is doing. So now I'd like to introduce our third lecturer. Once again, at the end of this day, we'll have an opportunity to have some Q&A on the chat function. So our third guest is Mariano Morazzo. Mariano Morazzo is an economist with an experience in negotiation and energetic policies for climate change, energetic transition, and the price of carbon. He started his career in the private sector in General Electric and other financial institutions. And after having a master's degree in sustainable energetic management, he's worked in the Italian Ministry of Environment on different international affairs regarding carbon. He's been an international consultant of Unidos and private operators in different organizations since 2012. He's also been working for Enel, a company that has been present or that is working in more than 30 countries. And today, he's the head of climate change and renewable energies policies at Enel. So, dear Mariano, thank you so much for being with us. And you can start your presentation called Climate Policy and Energy Transitions Used for Saturnite's Low Carbon Economy. Hello, David. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to the Grand Lodge of Chile. It's a great honor to be here and connecting from Rome, where my company has its headquarters. And as David was saying, from the perspective on the public policies point of view, I work with a private group, Enel, that works in more than 30 countries and also produce different networks and sells energy to more than 70 million people, 70 million customers, and half of them are renewable energy based. So we know about this, and we're trying to avoid using fossil fuels that are being less used all over the world. So I don't know if you can see my presentation. Can you see it? Thank you so much. So next slide, please. So on Enel, I work in everything that has to do with the policies all over the world at a global level and a national level too. And also I participate at the drawing stage along with different participants and different stakeholders. I work with different policies. And at the same time, we work in different working groups, World Bank, for example, different pollution, to support these low carbon based policies. So I will talk about three main things: climate change policies, energy transition perspectives, and the carbon pricing instruments. Next slide, please. So here it will be very easy because Dr. Marcelo Mena has mentioned a lot of things about this, but to simplify this, I just want to say that there are different organisms, the panel of climate change, that we're talking about hundreds of scientists from all over the world that are summarizing all of the information about climate change since the 90s. And the most relevant thing, as this is the scientific foundation on the policies and governments that need to take decisions. They simplify a lot of things. They're simplifying all of this information for the last 30 years, and our knowledge has been increasing. But also, science has realized that, in the first place, you need to operate in a timely fashion to work against climate change. And secondly, as knowledge increase, we know the damage in a better way. Damages usually are higher than we used to think. So, in other words, we have more benefits in decarbonizing everything, as Marcelo was saying before. So the relevant thing here is that since we have two based objectives, we have the objective of reducing temperature or avoiding 2 degrees instead of just 1.5. So along with the Paris Agreement and also COP 2015, they were talking about the IPCC, which was measuring on a trajectory on 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees. And this way we can have some results based on this study on 2018, where we can see that there's a huge difference between 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees, both environmentally and economically damagingly speaking, if we think about those two scenarios. So in other words, it's very recommendable, as we have heard before, it's better to mitigate than solving what may happen. So we need to approach and we need to target that 1.5. So what I want to mention from the policy point of view is that the investment has to do with different investors such as Enel. And we have different alternatives, not only regarding the objective, which is fundamental, of course, to limit the temperature to 1.5, but also on how different curves see that you can see on the right side of your screen. There are different ways of applying to the same commitment. For example, 1.5. These are different scenarios, and as you can see, and just to simplify, we have one scenario, a family of things, where we limit carbon-based emissions in the short term, and we rapidly go to zero. And the different scenarios, the last one, for example, where we can see that we take more time to reduce that curve and the emissions are slowly disappearing. So once they get to zero, we need more absorption, okay? So in order to recover every single additional emission in the middle term, we require to have more CO2 in the long term. So this means that it's not only about objectives and how do we reach that particular objective, but also on the different political, technological, and scientific leverage that we can use in every single country. So this is another way to see this. Here, for example, we are defined by gas type. So 1.5, science is showing that if we talk about CO2 regarding energy emissions, which is the left graphic, we can see that we need to reduce that faster in order to reach zero by 2050. These are possible scenarios. And another emissions such as methane, that's a little bit more complicated and more expensive. So to have a global scenario of 1.5 degrees, cost related to, so this would be required to reduce these methane emissions in a slower way in comparison to carbon. Is similar to black carbon and nitrous oxide. So we're talking about different technologies that may have different rhythms of mitigation. Next slide, please. So we get to an important point that has to do with the perspective of a private sector, that has to do with the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement showed a great ambition in the long term of keeping raising temperature well below 2 degrees, with efforts to stay within 1.5 by the half of the century. So the main point here is that the challenge is that we don't have an instrument to share this effort between different companies. This is just voluntarily. So transparency is very important because every single country, every 5 years, we started in 2015, they need to show these NDCs to upgrade them. It's not only about objectives, but also that every single country must show their instruments, their policies, and their financial tools to reach that goal. It's very ambitious, of course, but the most important thing is that the commitments made for that particular country or by that particular country must be fulfilled as they say, because every single country, of course, is the one that manages its own policies and decisions regarding technologies, areas, and impacts. So this is reviewed every 5 years, and now we are seeing new objectives. And fortunately, there are very important proposals from China, Europe, Chile, and they have even more ambitious goals. And another thing that we're seeing is climate finance, which is also important, the public finance that has to do with the confirmation of the commitment to mobilize 100 BN USD per year in order to reach decarbonization, but also the carbon markets, the price of carbon, carbon pricing that needs to be carefully managed because it has an impact. And of course, this should be more cost efficient in order to get to some particular agreement with a lower cost. On the right, we have a simplification of global emissions. And as you can see, the current policies, we're still emitting a lot. And if we get to a 3-degree impact, which was we used to have in 2015 on the yellow, and these are just objectives. We also care about different objectives that have to be more ambitious to reach that blue line or the lower one that is lower than 2 degrees. So now is the moment to increase objectives so that they could be coherent with the Paris Agreement and at the same time to implement what we have on the table already. And we need to implement all of these things with specific policies and clear strategies. So I've mentioned this. This is the status of the implementation of the Paris Agreement. We're doing good. We are good on transparency because we have a book that was approved on 2015 and 2018 to have a rule book, and we need more ambitious at the same time. This is happening right now, but we are close to reach the agreements in order to be coherent with the target of 1.5. And also climate finance is also something very important. We need more finance from both public and private sectors. Next slide, please. Next slide. So from the transition of energy, as I was saying, we've been working in different countries, not only to make our investment, but also because we believe that our business is following the direction of sustainability and the direction of climate change. But also we're seeing other things. For example, this is related to climate change, but this is also related to policy to improve the quality of air, the environmental sustainability, and also the energetic sustainability and geopolitical things, and also the industrial development. So as the lecturers have said before, mitigating has an advantage in the long and middle term. So this is the best thing to do. And at the same time, we need to generate some strategies of climate change by knowing that there are different objectives and different benefits when it comes to decarbonizing. So in this sense, as Enel, we've been working actively in more than 10 countries with different governments to participate on an analysis support to accelerate the transition at a national level. So to support governments, we have the knowledge, we have the experience as a group on the electric market, on the leverage that can be used to decarbonize, but these are not the only ones that can be used. There are other tools, for example, deforestation, and also more technology. And at the same time, we're also supporting this with different regulatory frameworks that should be transparent and stable. And every single investment and every single investor should be able to read them. And at the same time, we promote effective climate finance programs and market mechanisms. Next slide, please. So in this sense, as we've been talking with different consultants and local universities in every single country. We have some scenario analysis. Every single country is different, and every single country has a different strategy. So we are also working with national stakeholders, industrial stakeholders, institutional stakeholders, and at the same time, together as a whole table, we made some policy recommendations, some suggestions of strategies or some regulatory framework that can be important for every single country. And with a higher simplification, what we're doing right now is, as I was saying before, we support this with different scientific institutions. We have long-term uh, strategies, not only related to our energy sector, where we talk about 40 or 50 years of return, but also because the Paris Agreement is asking for every single country by 2020, which will be delayed by COVID-19, of course, we are requiring, or we are being required an update on our plan. So we need to have a long-term strategy as well. So the Paris Agreement is forcing countries to generate a long-term strategy to see the path of carbon neutrality. Also, it depends on the richness, on the wealth of each country, but also it depends on the chances of actually updating itself in the long term. So in this sense, we are seeing the scenario of 2050, and we have some political recommendations in the middle term to be treated in every single country. So as we can see in this slide, every single country, as we are seeing at a global level, we have different strategies on the reduction on every single country in different areas. So, for example, transportation is one thing, power is another thing. We have more mature energies, and it's easier to diminish the cost right there. Mariano, we have 3 minutes left, so I'll go faster. These are some of the countries where we made some strategies, 10 countries approximately, Chile, of course. And just to show you a few things, we have some lessons learned working in these countries in Europe, Africa, and South America. And there are some lessons, of course. Every single country is different, so every single government is different. Every single government must draw its own path, its own strategy, seeing the advantages of renewable energies and the way we can take advantage of them. And at the same time, we can see how we can manage the way of eliminating fossil fuels. Chile is participating in this transition. But also we are talking about electrification, which is probably one of the most complicated things, especially in a long continent such as Latin America. We have some huge areas. This is a challenge. It is a challenge to electrify, but also it can be expensive. So the network is important because electrification with renewable energies is a lot cheaper, as Marcelo was saying, but we require a more powerful and smarter network. And lastly, work, which is some of the important things when it comes to this transition. We need to consider the work transitions that we will face. And well, David, this will be my last slide and the last message I can give. The transition we're living and the challenges we're seeing are, well, a lot. And regarding the impacts and the benefits in the long and short term needs to be assessed. There are, of course, some trade-offs. So every single country must see those trade-offs. A second important point is that we have some synergies, cross-sector synergies. It's very easy to mention this. For our ministry, may not be that easy, but it's important to mention some things, such as the digitalization that is generating an important synergy. And the last thing that is also important, and this is something that is being addressed at a different level, which, for example, the international level, which is the Paris Agreement. We also have the regional agreements. It's also important to consider the regional agreements in investment. We have the Pacific Alliance, for example, in Latin America, and we have the European community in Europe, and also at a national level and local level. So all of these things are important when it comes to managing the territories. We have opportunities, yes, we do, but there are some challenges. And with this, I will pass the floor to you, David. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Mariano. Thank you so much for the time. And I will tell you that everything worked perfectly. So the message was very clear, and it was very well coordinated with the slides from Chile. So thank you so much. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end of this session, so we may go deeper on some of those points. And well, before continuing with our fourth lecturer, I'd like to especially greet two people that are joining us here, some important members of the lodge, Mr. Jose Garchidorena, the president of the sixth area of the Inter-American Lodge and the Grand Master of the Lodge of Uruguay. And at the same time, I would like to greet the Grand Master of the Chilean Lodge, who is also here with us today. So welcome, both of you. Well, our last guest is Maria Teresa Gonzalez. Maria Teresa Gonzalez is a journalist from the University of Concepcion. He has a master's degree in directive abilities from Spain. And also she's an expert in conflict mediation, and also she's studied on electric market from the PUC. So Maria Teresa today is the general manager of Starcraft in Chile, which is a company from the renewable energies from Norway, which is today the higher generator of renewable energies in Europe. So she is working in different companies in Chile. She was the general manager of Endesa and also the CEO in SVO. So she has a great experience in the public sector in different areas such as the Intendancy of Biobío and also Transantiago, also known as Public Transportation Network of Santiago. Maria Teresa, thank you for being here with us, and you can start your presentation called Renewable Energies and a Low-Cost Emission Future after the corporate video from your institution.
Estamos viviendo una de las épocas más desafiantes de la historia.
We're living some of the most challenging times of history. We require large-scale solutions that involve all of us, not only a few of us. These solutions can allow energy to be more sustainable and accessible and to generate some benefits. So in StarCraft, we are developing this kind of energy way before the climate crisis. We have 125 years of experience producing what the world needs the most: renewable energy, energy that can provide every single business, every single industry, energy that can provide new solutions. It's time to place some limits, to take some clear decisions, and to have the courage to take those decisions without hesitating. So we need to stop thinking about renewable energies as part of the solution. Renewable energies are the solution. So it's time to act. Be with us.
Hola, muchas gracias, David.
Hello, thank you so much, David, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much to the Grand Lodge of Chile for the invitation. I'd like to share my screen right now. Let me see. I don't know if you can see my screen because I'm being told that I cannot share my screen.
Todavía no se ve.
Denme un segundo.
Give me a second.
Es que me sale un mensaje de que no puedo compartirlo.
I
no sé.
received a message that I'm not allowed to share my screen.
Está habilitada.
You are supposed to be able to do it.
Ahí se está empezando a compartir.
Now,
¿Sí?
yes.
¿Ves la presentación o me
Can you
ven
see
a
my
mí?
slide now?
No sé. Ahora se ve la presentación.
No, we can see the slide. Perfect. So, first of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about StatGraph because we are a little bit new in the Chilean market. As David was saying, we are a company by the state of Norway, a 25-year-old company. We have a capacity of 19,000 megawatts. We are working in 17 countries all over the world. We have 4,000 workers. Now in Latin America, we are in Brazil, Chile, and Peru. So this is us today, but we have a strategy to be able to grow in 8,000 megawatts because we believe that in order to face the climate crisis, we need to accelerate the energy transition. And Chile, we hope to increase our production of energy 10 times in the next 5 years. So why are we doing this? First of all, we are aware that electricity and power is changing mankind. Every single office is providing communication and everything is possible with electricity. But unfortunately, the most important source of electricity is fossil fuel, and at the same time, they are the greatest threat to our country. The consumption of energy represents 75% of greenhouse gases emissions. So most of our energy also depends on fossil fuels. So we are convinced that we need to change that. In StartGraph, we believe that in order to have the temperature of our country below the point of no return, 1.5 degrees, renewable energies and electrification of energies shouldn't be part of the solution, should be the only one, the only solution. And at the same time, the good news is that we believe that we are able to do this today at a global scale. Renewable energies today are competitive, not only competitive, but they are also more competitive than the rest of energy sources. So I will show you a short video on how we are seeing this transition. So what do we need? We need to replace fossil fuels by renewable energies. We need to use clean electricity in transportation, construction, and industries. We need to develop renewable energies, zero hydrogen emissions, and carbon capture. We need to improve the efficiency of our energies in every single sector. We need to reach the cost of reaching 1.5 because reaching that is much more cheaper than facing the consequences of it. So as the video says, we believe that it's more expensive not doing anything than doing something. If we aim at 1.5, the cost of energy will be below what we're talking if something happened. And several experts at a world level is saying that 2 or 3 degrees increase, we're talking about 5 or 10% of GDP at a world level. And the good news here is that we run a study every single year, the low emission scenario, where we have some projections by the year 2050 on the way the industry will evolve. And we believe that the industry will be a great ally of this transition that is needed and also the climate action, because we will have higher energy, we'll have an increase in electrification, we will have lesser fossil fuels, we'll have a more efficient use of energy, and we will have some data that we project to the future. And by 2050, the solar capability will increase in 30, the wind capacity in 8, the cost of solar energy plus batteries, meaning the storage capacity, will decrease in 60%, the demand of electricity will double,
emisiones de
and
gases
all of these things will make that the greenhouse gas emissions will decrease in 44%. So you can see a solar plant that we have in the hydraulic center in Vandia in Germany. We're talking that by 2035, solar energy will be the main source of energy in the world. Here we can see at a graph how we think things will move in the future. So we have the reduce of carbon by 2050 and a very important increase in the use of solar energy and wind energy. Transportation, according to our projection, will be electrical by 2050. 60% of vehicles will be electricity based, 100% of vehicles will be electric, and the demand of oil will be reduced by 43%. We believe that the increase of the electrification of transportation will be increased by 20. And a fun fact to share with you, since I come from a Norwegian company, in Norway, we have committed that by 2025, every single new car that can be traded will be electric cars. And the Norwegian government is also generating the first commercial airline between both cities that we're talking about 100 kilometers. There are some technical challenges still, but the Norway state is aiming to generate also an electric-based air transportation. And the most important operator of that airport, which is also state-based, is also committed by 2040, every single domestic flight will be electric-based. By 2050, as I said before, almost 100% of new cars will be electric cars. And this is also showing us some challenges. And the most important challenge is flexibility, because solar and wind energy, they vary a lot. We don't have production during 24 hours of the day. So we believe that hydroelectrics with reservoirs are a great solution. Flexible gas is also a solution to provide some stability to the system. And the flexible purchase on the side of the demand is also that should be regulated. As Marcelo Mena was saying, batteries for storage, that is also very expensive today. Their price will be reduced and they will be more critical over time. Now, as I was saying, our mission is optimistic. There are some important signs. 2019 was the first year in decades in which the energy demand increased, but the production of fossil fuels decreased. And also that despite the COVID-19 crisis, the investment in renewable energies are still intensive. They are growing. Actually, in Chile today, we have 160 projects being built, most of them renewable energy based. We're talking about $14 billion of investment and 16 billion that are being assessed today, which is also good news. And as I said before, the green hydrogen strategy that was presented by the Ministry of Energy is also opening a world of possibilities so that our country can be a leader in solutions in our way to carbon neutrality. Now, the message is that we need to take care of this sustainable energy transition. We believe that we can move forward towards carbon neutrality that can allow us to have the temperature of the planet below this break point. And in order to do that, we need more awareness. We need financial stability, as Marcelo Mena was saying. Is hopeful. It's great to think about what BlackRock is doing with the different signals, the market. They are sending letters to every single CEO in companies where they are investing, and they told them, stop thinking about the short term and start thinking about the long term. And obviously now they are taking action. They are making the walk the talk, and they are putting a lot of pressure to those companies to assume some carbon neutrality plans, serious carbon neutrality plans. And at the same time, we require a lot of political will on this to make real progress. And we believe that Chile is being an example for the world. And this is a public acknowledge for the former Ministry Mena, because he has worked very hard on this reflection, on this discussion, and he's pushed the public policies So kudos for that. We believe that this can be done, and Chile can be a great example for the world. Thank you so much.
María Teresa,
Thank you
muchas
so
gracias
much, Maria Teresa. Thank you so much for your presentation, for your reel, for being with us, and to share what your company is doing. And I believe that these are very important lights, that a state is developing business strategies that can be a support for these huge challenges that mankind is facing today. Thank you so much.
Bueno, estimadas y estimados, como
So, dear guests, as I told you before, now we've had our 4 presentations, and from now on we have some time for Q&A, 20 to 25 minutes, where we can talk and discuss on the different questions that you may have. As an organization, we have a question prepared for our lecturers. I'd like to start with that question, but from that point on, now the chat function is being open, so you can answer and you can ask everything you want on the chat function. I will ask the lecturers, and if it's specific for one lecturer, you can also mention that.
bueno, la primera pregunta para nuestros
So the
invitados
first
hoy
question is the following question. So what sort of dilemma or ethical challenge can this energetic transition imply? I don't know if Janina, you would like to answer that. Are you there?
Ok, sí, David, por supuesto.
Yes, David, thank you.
En
Well,
términos de
regarding
los desafíos,
the
¿no?
challenges that we are seeing on this area is how this will affect the most vulnerable people and how we can make this transition fair. And I believe that this has made this is been made in different countries, and we are following the example of South Africa and Poland. We are also seeing examples of Spain and Germany to see how different governments are supporting people that are somehow left behind because the fossil fuel plants won't be working and producing anymore, and how we can take those people into participating in an economy, right? So I believe that's an important challenge. How are we going to train those people to have them reinserted in those economic activities? And I believe that training technicians in green hydrogen and how green hydrogen can be a new industry that can provide knowledge and training and capabilities to people, it's also important. And another thing that we are seeing a lot is access, affordability in general,
que estas tecnologías no
is that
pueden
these technologies shouldn't imply to the population higher prices. So we need to provide some concessions so that technologies can grow in a scale, storage, flexibility, all of these things without increasing the energy prices. And this is also a matter of concern, but at the same time, is that due to this higher scale, we should be able to reduce prices, and this should be good for people. I believe that's my answer for now. Thank you, Janina. Are you there, Mariano? Yes, I am. Well, of course, I agree with what Janina has said. I believe that these huge companies are the ones that should have an impact on the distribution on the energy transition. So considering time, this accelerated time that science required to have an impact on ecosystems and also economic activities. So the important thing is to manage this with the adequate policies by simplifying 3 dimensions, I believe. The first one is actually probably the most important one. It has to do with communication when we talk about policies, but also on the temporary basis. All over the world, in every single country, we have a trade-off, right? We have a lesson on how much did you sacrifice for these strategies that will have some sort of impacts and some sort of challenge. So how important is to carbonize, for example, to have a healthy planet and economic living planet to our grandchildren, for example. So that's the ethical challenge. How much are we going to sacrifice today, and what will be the impacts today, thinking about the future? The second point is more visible. That has to do with the impacts in different countries, in different dynamics, how this has an impact in different economies. And with the Paris Agreement, we haven't solved emissions yet. We have improvements thanks to scientific innovations. Chile is an active country, but there are other countries in Asia and Africa that are growing a lot, but it's a huge challenge for them to think about how, according to their economic capabilities and how to, according their financial and technological capabilities, what's their responsibility on a global scale on helping them, as the Climate Convention mentions. So has to do with impact among countries. And the third point probably is the most complicated one, between different sectors and different social classes and economic classes. Carbon is the first thing, right? There are a lot of workers working in mining for coal, good people that are working, and nowadays they see unemployed, and this has a cost. We need to do it, of course, yes. But at the same time, this should be in a less evident way, because this has an impact in people that have to change work, have to change city. And what are the instruments that we're using, as we are doing in Europe, for example, regarding incentives, that this has an impact on the price of energies. In France, for example, they had a problem. They had a high tax in coal, and it worked perfectly, but there was an impact in transportation. So the impact in the short term among different sectors, workers, technology is a very delicate balance to have. And we believe on that. And we're also working about this in Latin America, because we believe that this is the most efficient way. But at the same time, every single expert agree on that this should be managed accordingly, with the proper pace and the proper timing, considering time, for example. So the balance between efficient markets and efficient instruments that can provide security for the most vulnerable workers, that's something that we need to address. That's a current issue and complicated issue. Thank you, David.
Estoy aquí. Coincido
Yeah,
plenamente.
Teresa, are you there? Yes, I agree with Mariano. And there are two important ethical challenges. I believe that the first one has to do with the long term and compensate it in the long term, what we're doing, and how can we ensure future generations a planet that is understood as a normal planet with access to water, with clean air to breathe. And that's a challenge, an ethical challenge that involves all of us, because now we are seeing this discussion on the political side, right? That of course there is a political aspect that should be considered on assuming this long-term vision, not only on the short term, but also at a personal level, in the individual consumption, what we're doing on a daily basis at home, what we teach our children. I believe that this long-term perspective should be taught, should be impregnated in culture. And the second ethical challenge has to do with inequality. Climate change will affect differently different countries. And unfortunately, the most vulnerable countries and most vulnerable people will be the most affected one. Chile is one of the countries that is exposed the most to climate change, but countries like India, for example, with high levels of poverty, are also one of the most exposed countries. India will have disastrous effects in the following years. The sea level will rise, they will have some heat waves with a lot of dead people. And of course, there is an imbalance, an inequality. In the world today, there's still 1 billion people without access to electricity, and they will be the most affected by climate change, with
Problemas de
higher
alimentación, más
poverty, with
migración. Entonces
higher
ahí hay algo que a nivel
feeding
global tiene.
problems. So there's something at a global scale that should be worked as an alliance between different countries. And now, seeing this from the opportunity point of view, there are some opportunities. For example, if you see the reality, and if you see radiation in the planet, radiation is in the southern parts of the planet, right? Latin America and Africa. So there are some opportunities to generate more growth and more development of renewable energies, especially solar energy. So there are two sides of that coin.
Muy interesante, María Teresa, agradezco. Mira, algunas preguntas les voy a leer.
Very interesting, Maria Teresa. I will read some questions. Nicolas Almarza is writing, congratulations for the quality of the presentations, great presentations. A general question, how can we relate the climate objectives with the sustainable objectives internationally and nationally? And one particular question for Enel and Statkraft, for Mariano and Maria Teresa, how do you relate with the communities in which your projects are implemented? How do you contribute to the development of those communities? I don't know if the first questions could be answered by Janina.
Y la segunda en relación con las
And the
comunidades.
second one
María
relates
Teresa.
to communities, Mariano and Maria Teresa. Janina?
Yanina, ¿alcanzaste a escuchar la pregunta?
Janina, are you there?
Sí, la pregunta era cómo el desarrollo climático
So,
se...
The question was how climate development is related to sustainable development in every single country. Yes, I believe that should also be mentioned at an international level. And well, it has to do with what we show in the video. The impact of climate change is being felt continuously and strongly. It's happening more often over time with a higher impact. And this is affecting the most vulnerable population, people that live in areas with different floodings, for example. They will suffer floodings. We'll have some landslide,
los huracanes en el Caribe y en Centroamérica.
hurricanes in Latin America and the Caribbean. And these are the poorer people. So
Nosotros
we, as the World Bank, in every single project that we are developing of investment and technical assistance, we need to see the climate impact, whether we'll have a mitigation impact, adaptation impact, how we're going to count all of these things. And we need to think about this regarding the communities from the environmental point of view, to see what sort of impacts these things will have in communities. We need to make a lot of research with the different stakeholders and to continuously consultate on the different impacts that they will see and they think they will have. So I believe that sustainable development and climate are things that go hand by hand. We cannot think about sustainable development without thinking about the different issues that we will see regarding mitigation. And this is something that we see often whenever we develop a project. In Chile, for example, these impacts on how climate change will affect the country, well, everything that is being developed on the transportation projects, public transportation and electromobility, all of these things are public policies that have as a context improving the air quality for the citizens of Santiago. So that sort of investment we're thinking about a lot. Green hydrogen that will use resources that sometimes cannot be injected to the system, that are used, for example, to develop a greener mining industry and different projects that can develop these chains of value from the renewable energies moving towards a greener point of view. For example, the cement industry, the mining industry, the steel industry, all of these things have to do with sustainable development. And this is something that we cannot separate anymore. Thank you so much, Janina. Mariano, Maria Teresa, the relationship between your companies and the communities, and how do your companies contribute to the development of those communities? Thank you, David. Well, as Enel, we have a sustainability function that has been very active, but in the last 6 years, Enel moved his business strategy to the alignment of the sustainable goals and to the sustainable development linked bonds. We are talking about loans that we promise to the investment regarding the sustainable goals from the UN. And on the one side, we have sustainability. We work with that with different projects to help communities. We're very active on that. Education, poverty, medicine. Uh, we have an organization that works on this. But beyond that, beyond sustainability, in general terms, Enel has a strategy called Open Power. It has to do with power, both as empowerment and also energy. And we work with alliances or external partnership. For example, research with different universities. In innovation, we work with different ecosystems, open ecosystems. And in business, we have some partnership. And also in the policy point of view, we have some projects, and we've been working a lot on this. We have some alliances in every single country to discuss with governments. This could be the path because knowledge is widespread and it's also very complex. So, regarding sustainability, our most important strategy is being sustainable on the way we work, on the way we support, and the way we operate into business. So, we work with communities, yes. We are very careful about this. We work with every single stakeholders. We will respect not only the rules of policies, but we want to do something else, but also every single business strategy. We aim to work at different scenarios. So we aim of being a very sustainable company. Thank you, Mariano. Maria Teresa, do you have anything to say? Okay, David. Well, for us, the relationship with the communities and stakeholders is an important thing. Of course, the acceleration of the energy transition that requires an intensive construction of energy products has an impact in the territories where we build. We need to acknowledge that. So we need to take care of those impacts. It's key for us to consider three things that are very important once again when it comes to taking these projects to the territories. Not only negative impact, but also positive impacts. First thing is understanding what the project is. We have specialized teams that could talk with the environmental, cultural, social issues from those communities, especially with indigenous communities, the participation of those communities, the involvement of those communities. For example, now we are building a hydraulic plant in the southern part of Chile, and now we've generated not only a previous process of consultation, but also today during the construction, we have groups of monitoring and participation in which the communities, for example, are trained, and after that, those communities go to the project to see how things are working. And another aspect that I believe that is also important is to share the benefits in the long term. For example, to have some programs at the local level. We have 7 objectives of sustainable development, and we actively develop this with the community that support and aim at the long term. Our assets work at the long term. We have 100 years plans, so we need to build a relationship that is founded in transparency, in trust, and at the same time that aims at the long term, which is a concept that I love to mention because it makes a difference when it comes to sustainability. I believe those are the key things that we do, and especially regarding local development. We have some programs on the promotion of female leaders because we believe that we work with the gender identity and the objective number 8 with decent work. So on that line, we've trained people in those territories that didn't have access to work. Today they are working in our power plant and they have ethical wages, and we have different lines of work, so we get along with the communities on what do they need, what makes sense to them as well. Thank you, Maria Teresa. And now I will read a few questions and comments. A question for Mariano: how's Enel working on deforestation? Another question is, how can we start electromobility if the cost of an electric car is 2 times a fossil fuel based? There's no incentive. And one last question or comment. is, well, they're congratulating the organization, and the advanced progress of technology requires a higher human capital. So what's the role of the academy on this? How is NL related to research? I don't know if, well, Mariano.
So, el tema de descarbonización.
So first thing regarding decarbonization and deforestation, well, in our plans that we are studying and developing at a local level, we've realized in Latin America, Argentina, Peru, Colombia, Chile, that emissions at the farming products is an important part of the problem. So as Enel, as the electric sector, we are not directly involved, but we are more involved in the hydroelectric things. But we know that this is an important issue. So this has to do with a public policy management that is very delicate. So what we're trying to do regarding the discussion, there's a possibility to decarbonize other areas with some compensations from the forestry industry. This has been discussed, is being discussed. It's a complex issue regarding objectives and the Paris Agreement. So different countries should have a sort of balance. And today we have some opportunities in countries like Chile, Colombia, and Europe. They're researching on increasing the absorption of carbon in forests, in the use of territories. We could be efficient at a cost level, but also at a density level. And at the same time, to understand the balance between compensated and also decarbonizing in every single sector. So it is important to provide some investment today with the excuse to provide some assets in fossil fuels. So we don't have enough science space. So it is important to manage deforestation with public policies that have some benefits and territory management, public policy issues, even international issues about climate finance for deforestation, and to manage some sort of level for some country, some sort of compensation at international level. But we cannot think about decarbonizing housing without compensating forests. So science is also showing us that it shouldn't be managed altogether. We're required to reduce deforestation, but at the same time to reduce different areas. So we are in favor of on that. We are generating some projects on that, but we are paying a lot of attention on the dynamics of compensations. That's the first thing. And the other thing, electric cars. Well, it's true. It's true. An electric car today is more expensive. 5 years ago, I had a study and I was telling my colleagues, I can confess, electric cars, it'll never happen. Okay. And I'm a young person. With this study, working on leverages, that most of the things are economic, has to do with the batteries. It's not only about pricing, the pricing will go low and it's going low rapidly, but also about some policies that can provide the consumer, the person who drives the car, to be more relaxed. So we are missing for the electric infrastructure for recharge, and at the same time for some incentives on the price of electricity to provide higher use of this car. Yes, the prices of cars are reducing, the prices of batteries are reducing, but at the same time, we require other actions. So in 5 years, uh, the same thing will happen if we see what has happened in other industries. It will be more convenient over time. European countries are more advanced on this. They are providing a specific date in which they say we won't be selling more fossil fuel based cars. They're just a little bit ahead of us on the management of this transition of working infrastructure, etc. So this is possible at different rhythms at different countries, depending on the kind of transportation. Private cars is a lot easier if we talk about trucks, for example, or higher means of transportation. It's a lot higher to decarbonize them in the long term. There are other problems to be considered, but this will be convenient at an economic level, of course. Another thing is the human capital. And this is very important. And we're working on networks. I work with NL. I worked with NL, and we have a partnership with different universities. And we're implementing some advanced courses, and we are working with different students.
Con Mariano.
We lost connection with Mariano. So it has to do with the human capital, and they work with this. They work with these relations. Okay, Mariano, we lost communication with you a little bit. I was talking about human capital. So I just wanted to say that Enel is working on this, on the strategy of open power, and they have a stable relationship with different universities all over the world, including Chile. And we actively work on this, not only to train the human capital, the internal human capital, which is obvious, but also to work so that the countries that operate and the different units, they can collaborate on generating more knowledge, theoretical but also technological knowledge in the countries where they operate. So we have some innovation. Harvard, for example, Chile, Latin America, Europe, to put our knowledge together with academy, of course, which is an institution that can generate better things. So we're active on this. And also innovation. We have innovation hubs in San Francisco, in Israel, in different places of the world. And it's not NL because innovation is not made at a big company, but we participate and we promote hubs of innovation in different areas of the world, including Latin America. Thank you, Mariano. Well, we are running out of time. So the objective was to finish at 11:40. We have 1 minute left. So I'd like to mention some comments of the audience to see if Janina and Maria Teresa can choose one of them to close your interventions. So Ernesto Galaz is asking regarding technology, the, we're talking about the loss of traditional work. Is there any sort of technology, or I'm sorry, is there any sort of trade-off to prevent that? Another question is that micro consumers should have more options of subventions by the state to have some solar panels and to sell the energy to the distributing company. Luis Garcia is also asking something. Chile is well positioned on renewable energies, and with this, this will be an important asset for the green hydrogen. So, how come we are not reducing the cost of energy in our country? And for Maria Teresa, the plans of StarCraft are huge. Are we seeing to generate some distributed generation at a lower size? And what sort of projects do you have in that area? And another question, the efforts to reduce carbon emissions and fossil fuel emissions should be based on people and the future development, but these projects are affecting the environment as well. So what sort of strategy do you have to prevent the loss of biodiversity? So if you can choose one question among many to close our day.
Dale, María Teresa, adelante.
Those are great questions. Well, first of all, yes, we develop some large scale plants. 50 megawatts, for example, we are developing a 100 megawatts wind park. We work on that line. We are not seeing yet some small business or small projects, but, and I'm relating this to another question that someone asked on state incentives to promote the generation of distributed energy. And there is a program from the Ministry of Energy, Solar House, that is generating some support for people that can relate to their neighbors and they can generate some photovoltaic and solar panels in their own houses. And this will change the business model. We aren't there in Chile. This is still ongoing, is regulated, yes, but this is something that we're still working on because this huge model of generating units far away from the generation and the consumers will change a lot. And now we will have a modality that is brand new in which energy will be produced where it's being consumed. And this will imply a huge turn at our industry that is changing revolutionarily. And we need to be aware of that because some major changes are happening in our industry, and thank God they are in line with sustainability of of the planet. So please be aware of these changes. Thank you so much, Maria Teresa. Janina, any last words?
Mira, yo creo que
Well, yes, I
para
mean,
que, digamos, a ver, voy a tocar el tema de generación
I will
distribuida,
talk
¿no?
about distributed generation. In
Dos
India,
proyectos
for
de generación
example, we have two
solar que
distributed
funcionan ahí.
generation
Estamos hablando
projects,
de
huge
$600 millones,
projects,
¿no?
$600 million,
Haciendo financiamiento inicial.
and we have some
Entonces,
additional
todo
funding on
esto
that,
se trabajó de la
where
mano
basically we are
de la
working
banca comercial.
with
¿Y esto por qué?
banks.
Porque se quiere, lo que se
Why?
quiere es que las
Because what we
comunidades
want
puedan
is
acceder
to generate some
a esta
scales
nueva tecnología
in
competitiva,
which this new
¿no?
technology can be more competitive.
Se
So we're
concesionaba
using concessions to reduce
para hacer
costs,
políticas que
to
incentiven
have some
el uso
policies that can
de la
that can
masificación,
promote the
¿no?
massification
Y
of
a medida
this,
que esta
and at the
masificación
same time,
vaya bajando por economía de escala, que
um,
vaya bajando el
these
precio.
elements
Y
should
esto se
lower
puede aplicar en
prices,
varios modelos
and
de
this is
negocio,
generating some very important business models
como
with
áreas comercializadores,
great
que han
commercializations,
dado
and
para ir aumentando el parque
we've been
generativo
able to generate some loans as well with
y esto ha
these
sido
solar roofs,
aplicado
and
en
they're
otros
working
países,
great. We're doing the same
en la isla
in
Mauricio y en otros
Morris Island
en otras partes.
and in
Pero
other places of the world. But
que todo esto tiene,
let's say that
una entrada que tiene un
this
precio
has
alto que van a pagar
a high price
los
that
early
will be
adopters,
paid
¿no? Y que
by the
después
early
ese
adopters,
precio va a ir
and
bajando
then
y
that
va a ir
price will be
subiendo.
reduced and
Eso
it will
eso
be
pasó
massified. And the same thing
en lo
happened
que Chile experimentó
in what Chile
con
experienced
la energía renovable.
with renewable
Y,
energies.
y había una pregunta ahí que por
And
qué
there
no
was
se
a
bajaba el
question
precio de la
on
energía para hacer
why we
frente a
haven't
esto.
reduced
Y en ese
the prices of
sentido,
energies.
quería tocar el tema que
And in that sense, I wanted to say
los
something.
precios de energía están ligados a
Energy
las tasas
prices are
que hay en el
related
mercado.
to the bidding process,
Y esas
the market.
hace que
And that bidding
sea más
process
competitivo
make competitive prices
participar
because people who that will be increasing on 2021 was made by the bidding process made in 2016, 2017. So it shouldn't be reduced because the market already bid that process
en juego en unos años más adelante, ¿no?
and it started
Entonces, sí,
to
lo que
work a
pasa
few
es que
years
se
later.
produce la
But
energía
what's happening in the
renovable
market is that the renewable energy today is not injected.
a veces energía renovable
We
del
have
sistema
more renewable
CCS.
energy that the system can
Y uno
absorb,
de ese
and the
excedente
use of that
para desarrollar hidrógeno verde
energy
de
to
acuerdo a
develop
esas
green hydrogen that supports
que porque están
the mining
limitadas
industry in the north of Chile, where we have
es donde
solar
vemos mayor
energy,
potencial para desarrollar
we
esto.
see a lot of potential in that area.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Janina.
Thank you so much, Janina.
Por esta
And well,
intervención
with
de
this last intervention, we would like to conclude our day. And on behalf of the Grand Lodge of Chile and our commission and committee, I'd like to thank our lecturers, first of all, for your kind attitude and your work, for staying in touch and having a great event. Thank you so much, Janina, Maria Teresa, Mariano. Thank you so much. And Marcelo, who's not with us. Thank you so much. And also, I'd like to thank people from the Grand Lodge of Chile, Communication and Informatics from the Grand Lodge of Chile, who is supporting us uh, on this way from Rome, from the US, from different parts of the world. And finally, I'd like to thank every single one of you who were connected for participating on this idea and the challenge that we're facing today. And once again, I'd like to invite you to tomorrow, Wednesday, December 9th, 10 a.m., where we will go to day 3 of this climate week. And the main focus of tomorrow's work will be oceans and hydric and water resources. So thank you so much for being with us and see you soon. Thank you so much.
Excelente, amor.
La Gran Logia de Chile es una institución laica, integrada por personas de espíritu libre. Su estructura fundamental se basa en un sistema educativo, tradicional y simbólico, realizado a través de un proceso de perfeccionamiento personal. Exalta la virtud y dignidad del ser humano, promoviendo la solidaridad y la justicia social, y establece puentes para enlazar el pensar, el decir, el sentir y el actuar en beneficio de la humanidad.